Vani, welcome. Thank you for making it. I wouldn't tell you what all she has jumped through to make it here with all the chaos at Bombay airport and stuff like that. Thank you very much. You know, I always say this about Bangalore. Bangalore has one of the most awesome weather, and the rest of the world, all of us in rest of India used to super envy you. So we all prayed, and then God gave you traffic. So now we feel far more.
These friends, what else can you ask for, right?
Well. Even there's something called sibling rivalry too. So they're all rivals. So anyway, I don't feel very happy about how my body or bones move when I travel from one end of Bangalore to the other. But I wish, somebody would do a startup to change this traffic story. Like so. Anyway, welcome. Thank you very much. Vani, we are sitting on the stage in something called the RetailTech, retail summit. Retail has been very big. If you've been watching this space over the last 10 years, the face of retail in India has completely changed. And India is a large country of 1 billion people. We never had one retail, we had multiple retails. And in the 10 years, I believe we have spawned even more multiple retails. What do you see is the story today, like to kind of paint a picture of how it stands today? And then we'll come to how things have changed in different aspects. So can you tell us what do you think is retail today in India?
So first of all, I don't come from a retail background, right? So as a first disclosure, when I came to India and looking at what are the opportunities in India, sometimes you have to bring a outside perspective because you don't have all the reasons why something cannot work, right? So the same thing, you look at the traffic, you look at so many issues from access, affordability, and so on and so forth. And though retail is a large opportunity in India, organized retail is still, as you know, a very small opportunity in terms of market share in India, right? So I think India is a very, very unique country at multiple levels. Let's just take from organized retail, which requires a certain infrastructure and a certain price point for it to work. It can only work in the large metros. Then you have the Kirana, which is, of course, what is mostly retail. Then there is the story of the brands. In India, because a large amount of the consumption from the top 10% consume differently than the next 40%. Most of, if you see HUL and large players, much of their retail profitability comes from rural, not so much from urban. So then the question of brand and brand loyalty, right? India doesn't have as much brand loyalty. If you see Parachute Oil, right? India is a distribution game, has been rather, less around a brand loyalty game. So Parachute Oil has 26x more depth in distribution than, let's say, the next local brand of oil. So, so I think distribution is a big part, and these things help certain kind of players. So the question in our mind when we sort of processed all this, and remember, I can only process it from what is the value of tech in solving a problem, right? Because you could come at it from a very different angle and come with also different and valid and viable answers. But since I'm not looking to run a retail conglomerate, but I'm looking for where is the disruption from startups. So the way we looked at retail and, was to say, what can we do for the top 10% of India who think, act, behave globally? There is a certain brand association which is very different how they behave, more digital, premium value for experiences, and so on and so forth, versus the rest. So the e-commerce story, as all of us are very familiar here, is really the 100 million, you can call it 150 million, we can argue on some number in between, but really doesn't matter. the traditional e-commerce models, which is the wave where we started, and fortunately at Kalaari we said this has to be first because opportunities are like, you know, peeling a onion. You have to create a certain infrastructure before you can unlock the next level opportunity. Today, with billion in transactions in UPI, I think we'll come to that, different kind of opportunities we can engage in. But if we look back, unlocking the digital opportunity of access was very, very important. And there are some things I hope we get to talk about on not every format can go digital because customer acquisition cost in India is not cheap, but their ARPU is not high. So you have to find an answer that allows you to have a high CAC, and the only way you can afford the high CAC is if there is a repeatability. And if you can't get that repeatability, then these models, these digital models can't easily work, right, specific to India. So we'll talk about that hopefully in a bit. But coming back to summarize, so we saw a huge digital opportunity. Then who's the customer, what do they want? That is the first wave. Then there is a whole enablement of that, which is important. That is another opportunity. Now, thanks to Geo and UPI, we can talk about the next 40%, India, which is very different models. So brands, distribution, whether that is digital or physical, enablement of that, that's really how I see, from my lens, the retail opportunity. Yeah?
So Vani, as you just enumerated, there are like probably a lot of different lines of talk that we can have here, a lot of different opportunities and probably a lot of different challenges at different level. But the first opportunity, as you said, is the 10%, the e-commerce ready people who do not require teaching, they have access, they have everything. And then there's this 40% opportunity, which seems to be a very large opportunity, which seems to be attracting a different kind of challenges and different level of people. But what has been questioned in the last few months has been consumption. Like, is our consumption keeping up with it? And how that has made a difference to how these, both the 10% and the 40% behave. Has that made a difference also in the digital space? Like, are they behaving differently? Are companies working differently in retail because consumption is under pressure, for example? Do you see that?
You can look at consumption from a growing market or capturing market share, right? There is always let's assume for a moment consumption is not where it ought to be. It still doesn't take away the problems that exist in retail in India, right? Then the question of how are you going to capture market share is a very valid and viable opportunity even today, right? So I think that the overall retail opportunity, which is, has and will continue to reinvent itself, because wherever there is friction, there is a possibility of reinvention, right? So, and hence, I worry less about the consumption, which anyway I don't control. But I think India is growing enough in the context of what is material to us. Is there opportunity to, create new models, create companies of scale, and create successful businesses? Can we find those founders? Can we fund them? Since that's the context of NPC, to me, we are not solving for Amazon problem.
Correct.
Okay? We are solving from what is Amazon not doing that I can do, right? That is what we are solving for here. So, and I'm not worried about that.
So
From the context of the assumption,
Yeah.
consumption.
Yeah, there are enough people, there's enough startups focusing on that, and there's enough places for them to work on, correct?
Absolutely.
So now let's come to the point of the next 40%. Now there's a whole opportunity which probably you can touch on, is the creation of brands in that space, creation of distribution in that space, and creation of other enabling things like, for example, credit and payments and all that kind of thing. What do you think is happening in that space? Where do you think the opportunity is? You can touch on some examples of what you're seeing.
Yeah. So by and large, the top 10%, let's just spend a minute on that. The distribution game for that is more or less done, unless you can figure out a new model through which you're going to somehow, you know, redisrupt that equation, right? So, like we talked, CAC on an average is around 800 rupees, and an average order value is 300 rupees. So you go figure this out, right? 300, 400 rupees, which means that you have to be a massive distribution engine, right? In order to consistently succeed, and even there you're going to require enormous capital, with the Geo saying they're going to put 15 billion or whatever. So you have to figure out how, you know, how you succeed on these distribution platforms, because they can't do it all. But as an investor, never say never, but we are done investing into the distribution platforms. So those were the days for Myntra, Snapdeal. You saw what happened with ShopClose if you don't sell your company soon enough. And there was a point where they had a relevant platform, right? So this distribution games is a massive scale game, and that has to be played differently. And I think that game is done. The brand game is never done, right? So what are the brands that you can recreate, newly create? And there's a lot happening in beauty, there's a lot happening in food, there's a lot happening in niche formats. You can call it organic, you can call it meatless meat. There's a company that has done extremely well. Funny name, No. I'll tell you in a minute. But so there are different ideas, and you can always capture consumer behavior patterns that are continuously emerging in India, because there are, you know, behavioral models that are not yet, how should I say, stratified, right? So there is definitely a brand opportunity. Now, brand opportunity has to be thought in the context of what is the distribution, right? So that, I think, exists for the 10-20% India market for sure. Now, if you take the rest 40%, there are many models coming up. There is, you know, social commerce model that has emerged, which really says CAC is not my problem. It says that I'm going to push the CAC problem down to a reseller, and there's nothing new about this. I mean, Avon did it. What's the pyramid scheme?
Yeah, the MLMs, the various MLMs.
It's not a new model. It's just a question of how can you do it at scale, how can you do it efficiently in the digital world, right? So, you know, you have to either invent product experience, or you have to invent a business model where you're changing the cost factors. And the biggest cost factor you have to change in India is distribution cost, right? So we already talked about that. So if you're going to change the distribution cost, then you have to figure out what is that model to access the customer. So there is massive scale that is getting built up by some of these social commerce companies, which say, look, I'm going to bring my platform to enable the micro entrepreneur. So you can call it the Uberization if you want to use metaphors, right? To say, you know, I neither own the car nor do I have the driver on my payroll, but I'm going to provide you a platform so you can be a micro entrepreneur, and the unit economics actually work for you to be the micro entrepreneur, and then the CAC is your problem, right? So that's the social commerce models that are largely penetrating, you know, tier 2, tier 3 cities, because, you know, it changes the access question. Now, within that, the opportunity exists to say, are you a specialist? Are you horizontal? You know, is there certain price point where you appeal? Because India is, of course, land of opportunity, but the opportunity is not homogeneous. That's the problem, right? India is so fragmented from an opportunity base. You can look at it from so many factors. You know, there are probably 22 ways, which apparently is how HUL looks at it, in which you can divide, you know, India. So there is no one India, so to speak. So I think there is a large opportunity to crack this distribution model through newer models, right? The old models was, you know, you had to be a large conglomerate and you had deep distribution model you created. So nobody else, even if they had a product, could enter easily. That is getting disrupted. Distribution is getting disrupted massively, right? That's the only way you can reach cost effectively the 40%. In those models, there are other things emerging, which is really social buying. Because if you look at Facebook, WhatsApp, YouTube, all of these guys, India is number one market for them in terms of their focus, apart from US. Why is that? Because the growing consumption from, not only number of users, but the amount of time they're spending, all of that is off the charts, right? What has happened with data costs being zero. I think YouTube average user, and I have really no idea how to make sense out of this number, is average user spends 2 hours on YouTube. What does that mean? They're bigger than, television, and, and what are they doing for 2 hours? And who are the people? Those are the questions as an entrepreneur you can answer for yourself. But the social commerce selling models, right? Are gaining traction. So I don't even have a website. I'm only going to sell you through, social commerce. And ironically, it is growing more you would think that it would grow more from people like here, because, you have the apps and you're maybe more digitally savvy. That's what you would think. But if you look at where all the vernacular is shifting, it's shifting to social media, right? So vernacular content, vernacular hence based commerce is shifting to social media. So social selling models, I think, are emerging. I'm not saying there is and these are areas where, unlike in the top 10%, the distribution model, I don't think we have established leadership, which means it's open game for everyone, as long as leadership is not established, right? With massive market share and massive funding, so to speak. I also think other more niche models are interesting that are emerging, there's some traction on rental models. I think we lag maybe by 3 to 5 years some of these models that work in other countries. But slowly I'm seeing early traction to it. I always thought the Indian, cultural context, maybe rental is a model that won't work as well, but early traction exists to say maybe, there is a different millennial behavior to ownership, which is, global, of course, but, is also equally valid in India. And I think this is, obviously, we are talking at a product. We are not talking at service level, at product level. So these are some of the models for the 40% from distribution. Then there is a whole brand product question, right? If you see, Decathlon has become massive in
India.
In a 4 or 5 year period, right? Very different format. Nobody thought sports only format, but a certain price point, right? And sometimes the cue for all of these is when my driver, my staff would borrow my Decathlon card so they could go shop, right? So, and that's interesting when you think about what that means, right? And this is not for sports at all. We know, this whole market is much more.
Is this a larger view, like this large format, bulk buy, these kind of formats?
Yeah, so
do you think technology, on the other hand, now is co-opting other formats?
Yeah. So there are two things, right? They are the yin yang, like a seesaw. There is a deep personalization model going on, right, for me. And this is going on at such a level. If you look at the holy grail of Myntra or all these guys, how can I personalize your experience? How do I know more and more?
Even on CureFit, they're doing something similar, correct?
Even on
Super
CureFit, how do I make sure I know so much data about you individually? So this is your protein, this is your this, that's the CureFit, deep personalization
what
models.
What you eat, everything.
Everything. So very, very data-driven models that's driving deeply personal experience. At the other hand, the yin-yang is value-driven models. Maybe I don't really care for such deep personalization if value is the offering that you have, right? And one of our companies ran a simple experiment in a society, right? For those that are not familiar in India, that just means like an apartment complex or something that's
Multi-unit dwelling.
multi-unit dwelling, if you will. So as a society, right? So they ran an experiment to say if all of you could put down, let's say, the amount of rice that you want. You start with a certain price, and rice, wheat, whatever, staples, right? We'll show you as everyone in your unit puts their order for the week, how much the collective group cost will go down, right? Gamification. There are a lot of companies I call it gamification, So, but there's a lot of these kind of models getting employed. We have a company, Mall 91, which I don't want to just talk about our companies. Hopefully I haven't so far, but, they're engaging this gamification engagement to promote certain behaviors, right? So what was interesting is, do you really care if you're living in a multi-unit society, whether your rice is 5 rupees more or 10 rupees more per kg? That's probably not what you're trying to save. And anyway, most of those people, how much rice do we all eat anyway? Much lesser than, I think we used to eat before. But they just took the tables to run an experiment to show, does India would they value a group buying model? And maybe it's the gamification, it's whatever. Whereas what they saw is more and more people joined the game. I'm just saying game as a loose word, when they saw the value going down. So there are, I think, different behavioral models that can emerge for how we solve for, retail. So, so I think there is so much experimentation at so many levels happening. It's interesting.
Let's talk about one more thing before we go down the funding and other things.
Yeah.
We've always looked at what we do in India in terms of retail with imported models or imported thoughts, in the sense that we've looked at US and Chinese models typically to actually almost predict what India would do.
Yeah.
At some places it's been awesomely successful, at some places it's completely failed.
Yeah.
Like, so what is your space on it? Should we look at from that, or should we just build our own?
This notion that, first of all, learning and plagiarism is perfectly fine. I think the best thing is to plagiarize if you can. But you have to make it uniquely yours also, right? Even when we have taken, we can say it's a Pinduoduo model or an Amazon model or whatever it is, or a Uber model. Uber had to still do cash in India, and they didn't figure that out for a long time, that, if you don't offer cash, it's the only country, and that's why they allowed Ola to exist and succeed, right? So there's always, you can say it's Uber, but you can say we are Uber, but we take cash, right? So then that could simply be your, differentiation to get that window, right, of execution. So you do have to do uniquely India, even if you're going to rip an idea. I don't think you could, because India is such a different country with such unique dynamics that you would, even if you rip, I think you would have to succeed only by making something that is unique and insightful to India under the cover, right? But having said that, I think that's only a tip of the iceberg opportunity as I think about it. I think we have to solve for access, affordability, and convenience, which is really at the end what you are providing, So the access, affordability, convenience, value, box, if you will. I think you have to solve for that uniquely for India. And the only companies, I believe, that have succeeded are ones and have succeeded and will succeed are ones that have gotten to those nuanced insight on that, right? So when someone comes and says, I am Uber of something, for me, it's a turn off. It's okay for you to tell me you're Uber of something, but then what is your value add about that for why it's going to be different for India? It's that little insight, right? If you look at Dunzo, it's not our company, but I think they're doing a great job, right? They've grown very fast. Look at the problem that they've solved. When so much money has gone into logistics into India already, they argue whether they're a commerce company or a logistics company. So let me just put them in a logistics box for the moment. But they solved for that hyper local delivery. You talked about traffic. I don't want to go from here to there to deliver my Diwali gift, right? You come to my house, you pick up my gift, you go give it to PK. If he lived in India, he didn't, so he didn't get my Diwali gift. But but
No, I can
I didn't
physically
get one
carry it.
from
I
you
can
either,
physically carry
right?
it.
So
I'll take it. I'll take it. I'll take it.
so homemade sweets gone next time you're in town. So but I think Danzo solved a very uniquely India problem that doesn't exist in an efficient economy like US or Dubai or
just
I
that
don't
we
know South
Indians-
Africa at all, so I can't comment.
We
But
Indians don't like to do things with our own. Somebody else can do it for us. We'll get him to do it.
yeah, and and the cost of it, 40-50 rupees for someone to deliver a document, get something done, pick up my order there, pick up flowers for me, whatever it is, right? So, and Danzo found a very interesting, unique India only problem to solve for, right? So I think we have plenty of such opportunities.
Correct. So let's come to the big elephant in the room, which is funding. So there's retail has taken a very large amount of funding over the last few years, different experiment, be it the 10%, be it the experimentation with the lower down the pyramid retail. What do you think is going to happen over the next 2 to 5 years, considering that we believe, or at least some people believe, that there is a change in investors' thinking in the kind of money that should go there?
I think on funding, unfortunately, sometimes entrepreneurs forget that their existence has to be rooted into solving a problem and being a massive creator of value, right? That's the only reason to do entrepreneurship, because you have to be a bit warped and a little mad and a little illogical to be an entrepreneur, right? And I've been there. There's no logical reason to be an entrepreneur. It's too painful, right? So then why do you do it? You have to do it because there's a problem that's biting you that you want to solve. You have such a deep passion to solve for it that you throw all reason and logic out the window, right? Now, why am I saying that? Because short-term models that don't really think about, can I create this business for the next 10, 15 years? That's how long it's going to take you. I may come and go as an investor. Most likely I'll come and go. So you have to think about, how do shareholders change? And they will have to change. And you have to understand that. And, there is a problem, but there isn't a deeper understanding of how capital can be leveraged and used, right? The biggest challenge I see is, notion that the value creation comes from the capacity of capital you raise and what that valuation represents, right? And we all know what has happened to Uber, what has happened to WeWork, let alone what many of the examples of India. So this is not a particular Indian sin, okay? This happens everywhere, that sometimes you lose track of that to say, it's okay to be unprofitable, but do I understand my business well enough that the core unit economics work, right? Now, the problem is not access to capital. I think plenty of capital exists. Okay. The challenge that I find is where today capital has gotten smarter and more skeptical is burn models that are not really sustainable, and that is the problem, right? So my view is, it is better to take, however you draw a circle, it's a geography, it's a particular profile of a customer, whatever it is, and you have to make your unit economics work in that. That's what your Series A, Series B capital is for, right? Without that, don't raise growth capital. That's the best advice I can give, because I think if you raise growth capital before that, and if that takes you 2 years, so be it. I mean, if all your friends are showing up on ET, don't worry. There's another day where they will also show up, show down on ET, so it doesn't really matter, And I hope there's nobody here from ET. So, so I think
somebody did raise their hand at the back.
Somebody, sorry, I love ET too. So, but I think I think the caution would be that the massive burn models, I don't think that world is coming back for the next 2 years. Maybe never, although I won't say never because somehow history keeps repeating. I saw the 2000 crash, I saw the 2008 crash, same habits sometimes come back. But I do think that for now, that it's not a question of I need to raise $100 million. You can raise $100 million, that's not a problem. But you can't raise $100 million for a company that's losing, $50 million to the bottom line every year, right? So that is the scenario change in funding.
There's always somebody who wants to burn some cash, correct? So they find new ones.
They're gone. The people who
maybe
want to burn cash are gone.
Maybe
so
some cash is made for burning. I don't know. Maybe we'll know sometimes, So the last question before we let people ask the questions is, the theme for NASSCOM Product Conclave has been 10x. Scaling has been the focus of what we're talking about. Any messages to entrepreneurs and people who are working in terms of how they can scale 10x? We've looked at like growing the product market from $8 billion to $80 billion and do that 10x increase. What is it? Would be some points that people could follow.
I'm a very simple person, so I don't have answers to complex questions like that, okay? So
Just give
just
them
do
money.
what you're doing, do it well, that's all, I mean, I think if you see what Satya Nadella has done with $1 trillion market cap in Microsoft, you don't sit and try, it's not your headache to think of a 10x, okay? Let the analysts, let some market research people think about 10x and all of that analysis, okay? As an entrepreneur, you just have to focus on how do I do what I do really, really well, and what's my moat and what's my value. And obviously in that you have to be paranoid. We both come from the world of, if I said only the paranoid survive, we both know what we are talking about because that was a book written by Andy Grove from Intel, and we came from that school of thought and era, which is that as a founder, you have to be paranoid and hence you problem solve before others problem solve. Not that you get paranoid and then you have to take Prozac, that's not what I mean, but so that you just have to problem solve, that you are not complacent. I really think 10x comes from, I was just talking to PK. By the way, for those of you who don't know PK, I think he gets people to do whatever he wants them to do, right? Because he's charming, he's authentic, and it's impossible to say no to him. So, of course I live in Bangalore, but I had a all-day board meeting yesterday in Mumbai, so I had to leave at 5 a.m. in order to be here, and when PK says do that, then you just do it, right? You can't say no to him.
I need a helmet already, man.
And then he keeps telling me I'm going to feed you Jodhpur kachoris, which he never does. That's the only reason I do this 5 a.m. and all this stuff. And for the record, he has not fed it to me yet, and he's been promising for a long time. Okay? So
Point taken, point taken.
But I think for the 10x, my view is, yesterday I was in a company called Dream 11, which is not retail, but they've reinvented the whole sports gaming, right? In 4 years, they are 2-3 billion in entry fees, right? And their EBITDA is 30%, and they started with, I'm going to solve a problem, and I'm going to do this really, really well. Even 4 years ago, they couldn't have said, this is where we are going to be. They're 100x where they were, right? So I just think that you have to be very, very good at what you do, and the 10x will happen, from an entrepreneur's perspective. That's how I see it. From a system perspective, what you do, what NASSCOM does, what any of us can do to promote that at a systemic level, at a structural level, at a policy level. I think those are different questions, maybe for this forum, may not be for this forum, but at an entrepreneur level, I don't think they should think too much about, 10x, this, that, and all that.
So I'll summarize it. Do what you do it well, and ask for help. We are all there. Thank you very much.